It's the Elephant in the Dome, the official podcast of the Washington State Senate Republican Caucus. I'm Tracy Ellis with Senate Republican leader John Braun. Filled up my car the other day, and even though I was at Costco, it was still pretty expensive. But that's nothing compared to diesel. You have a diesel truck, Senator, and I know that it was pretty eye-opening to you when you filled that thing up. Obviously, part of the reason why fuel prices are so high right now is the war in Iran. But you compare our state to other states, and it's really eye-popping when you look at the difference in prices. I guess, talk about where we are with fuel prices right now and how we got here.
Yeah, there's a lot going on, and it's certainly one of the impact that, we talk a lot about affordability here in the state of Washington: food, gas, housing, childcare, healthcare, but fuel, gas, whether it's gas for your car or diesel, in the case of my truck, or other forms of petroleum, the prices have really shot up. And you're right, at least in the last 6 weeks or so, 5 or 6 weeks. So a big part of that is because of the events over in the Middle East. But we've struggled with this problem long before that, and it's been very apparent. The policies put in place by the Democratic majorities over the last several years have really driven our prices up relative to our neighbors, either Oregon to the south or Idaho to the east. And then if I happen to travel a week or so ago to see our youngest daughter, and so I was back on the East Coast, and even on the East Coast where it's still pretty expensive, it was in some cases a couple dollars a gallon less than what you're seeing here in Washington State. And that is the direct result of the Climate Commitment Act, the cap and trade system that's in place here in Washington, the very high gas tax, I think we're the second highest in the nation, and it's going to continue to go up because they put a law in place last year that makes it go up, over time with inflation. And then what we haven't even seen yet is the low carbon fuel standard, which has been in place for a while, but wasn't really having a big impact. They just made a big change to that last year that's going to have potentially as much as a 50-cent increase in the near term. So there's a lot going on in fuel prices in Washington. And the last thing I would say is the majority likes to talk about taxes and the regressive nature of taxes. I'll tell you what's really regressive is fuel. When it goes up like this, when it's higher than others, has a much bigger impact on folks with lower economic means than others.
The Climate Commitment Act is supposed to be helping the climate, thus the name, Climate Commitment. But, while gas prices while gas prices are going up and up and up and up and up, and a big part of that is this Climate Commitment Act, have we seen a real difference in carbon emissions?
And not that I can tell, frankly. I mean, and the data we've seen from Department of Ecology, from the Office of Financial Management, shows little or no actual reduction in carbon. And when you really dig into it, a couple things you really pop out and recognize it's nearly a couple of $1 billion a year that our citizens are paying extra because of the cap and trade system with the idea of reducing carbon. And it's not affecting behavior a whole lot because people have to get to work, they have to get their kids to school. All the things I had to do still have to be done. They just have to pay a higher price. And I think maybe more importantly, the Democratic majority is they've taken this huge windfall from the Climate Commitment Act. They've used it to support special interests that really have no direct impact on the reduction in carbon. And in the very few cases where they support a project that is reducing carbon in any way, when you look at how much they spent compared to how much carbon they, reduced or sequestered in some cases, it's very expensive, much more expensive than you could go buy, carbon reduction on the free market. So it's not, in my view, it's failing at all points. It's not doing the job it was supposed to do, and it is driving up this cost of goods and cost of living here in Washington State.
The gas tax, as you mentioned, is one of the highest in the country here in our state. And according to Governor Ferguson, our roads aren't that great. I mean, we have some of I think he said the worst pothole problem in the nation. There are bridges that have been shut down because they're in such bad shape. What's this gas tax paying for?
That's a great question. I think we're either the second or third highest in the country. We have been for a long time. Our system doesn't work. It relies on a gas tax that is declining. It has been over bonded, meaning we borrow against it for decades. So we aren't getting the full value. We're paying a lot of that money in interest. But there's really a couple things going on that are creating what is nearly the worst transportation system in the country. I think we ranked 48th out of 50, something like that. It was really, really discouraging. One is we continue to put in more and more labor law that is driving up the cost of labor, and it's not necessarily helping workers. It's driving up the cost of business, really, so that it's neither helping workers nor helping keep the cost down, and therefore not helping the state or the population in terms of having projects we can afford. We've seen big projects, up in central Puget Sound come in way over budget. We just saw the price for the proposed bridge over the Columbia River down between Washington and Portland come in almost at $15 billion. Outrageous prices. I mean, everywhere you go, the prices are much too high, and frankly, we have a declining resource. So it should be no shock to anyone. But the reason that's happening is because of policy put in place by the Democratic majority that drives up labor costs, that drives up the cost of doing business, that's encouraging folks who can do these types of projects, big companies that can do these types of projects, to look elsewhere for business. They could do business anywhere in the country, and we don't make it all that attractive for them. So either they don't bid on the projects or they bid a very high amount because they know it's going to be expensive to do business here.
We talked about the price at the pump and how that shocks people, but really, especially when you're talking about diesel, that also impacts the price of everything else. And one of the things that people are very, very concerned about is the price of food. Obviously, everything in the grocery store has to come in on truck, right? Trucks use diesel. So that's going to push the cost up on everything, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I was just talking to a fellow that runs a small trucking company the other day, and these fuel prices are really affecting their business, and they're able to pat just to stay in business. They pass those charges through to the consumer to whoever's shipping, but ultimately that goes to the consumer. He's spending, I think he told me, a couple $100 extra per day per truck. That adds up in the terms of cost of goods, whether it's at the grocery store or goods that are shipped to you directly. All this stuff has a transportation cost, and so in addition to the shock of filling up your tank at the gas station, every time you buy anything, you're going to see additional cost because of the transportation issue.
What can the legislature do about this? Are the Democrats, they seem to be concerned about costs, and when they talk about national things like tariffs and the war, and they seem to emphasize how much these things cost people. You think they are open at all to making some adjustments here?
Well, so far we've gotten nothing. Over the last, we have proposed either in the form of legislation or it's form of an idea we've shared. And both a suspension of the gas tax for a period of time, and you've seen other states do this to try to get at the affordability issue, or a suspension of the cap and trade system for a period of time to try to reduce. I mean, both of those would take anywhere from 50 cents to $1.50 off the cost per gallon. It's a big deal, and I don't think we're ever going to get them to get rid of those entirely. In fact, in the case of the gas tax, we do have investment in our transportation system we need to make, but a short-term suspension to help with affordability, I think, is a good idea. But so far, neither the Democratic majority leaders nor the governor have signaled any willingness to consider something like that.
When we talk about energy, oftentimes we do focus on gas and fuel, but there are other energy costs that are going up as well. I just saw the other day that that one utility is looking to raise natural gas prices. And the Attorney General here in our state seems to be against that, says he's going to fight it. But it's not like this utility is saying, oh, we want more money, so we're raising rates. I mean, their costs have gone up, right?
Yeah, I mean, I saw the comment from the Attorney General. I mean, it seemed like pure politics to me. I mean, he's not a dummy. He gets why these prices are going up. And it was kind of odd that he chose just one company. They're going up at every single, we have three or four companies here in the state that deliver natural gas to consumers. All of them have significant price increases, either have already been in place or been applied for, or they're getting ready to apply for them. So the idea that somehow he's going to wade in and change the laws of economics, with a team of lawyers just doesn't make any sense to me. And I think he knows better. He just recognizes that we have a real cost of living issue here in the state of Washington. He is unwilling, at least so far, to adjust course on the underlying Democratic policies that are driving those cost increases. So he's trying to get a headline saying he's against it without really doing anything.
In these energy prices, natural gas and also electricity, they're also impacted by the Climate Commitment Act, right?
Absolutely. I mean, we see, so the impact of the Climate Commitment Act is throughout our economy. We see it most obviously, the consumer sees it most obviously at the gas pump. But whether it's a gas pump or if you happen to be a natural gas consumer at your monthly bill, but also in your electricity charges. When you look at, because every one of the utilities, because they have to comply with state law, they're making this transition over time to different sources of energy. Of course, the Democrats have forced the shutdown of different types of power generation, and it's been planned for a long time, but the coal plant here in my district shut down at the end of the year. There was a little bit of stuff with the federal government, whether it was shut down or not. But at this point, it's shut down, and that's been planned for a long time. But that took off a very relatively inexpensive form of energy, and the same thing has happened on forms of energy that can be brought in from outside the state, where they don't. Either they don't meet the requirements of the Climate Commitment Act, or you got to buy expensive credits to make them usable. All this is driving substantial increases in electric costs as well. So Washington has had the good fortune for decades of having one of the lowest electricity energy costs in the nation. That's really not true any longer because of over a decade of new policies by the Democrats that make power generation more expensive. And when it gets more expensive, those costs get passed on to the consumer.
Well, there are even regulations now, right, that look to phase out natural gas, which is still fairly inexpensive,
right.
And compared to coal, as you mentioned. Actually, the coal plant, what they're talking about doing there is turning that into a natural gas plant. So it's a lot cleaner than coal. But that seems to be in the crosshairs of Democrats now as well, correct?
Yeah, so both the current administration, and particularly the last administration under former Governor Inslee, they were very opposed, and the environmental activists have been very opposed to natural gas, which is, kind of silly. I mean, and we see in Europe, they still call natural gas clean energy. Certainly compared to other forms of power generation, it's very clean. It's also very cost effective. And you mentioned like the coal plant, the hope is we can convert that to a natural gas plant. I think that's a good idea, but it's an idea that should have been considered years ago. And was considered and kind of, shot down by the previous administration. And now we're under the gun, and we're going to have not only expensive forms of generation, but maybe not enough. And because we're going to have shortages, that too is going to drive up prices. So there's a lot going on here. All of it was predicted by Republicans who were worried about the cost of energy, were worried about the availability of energy, and were largely ignored by the Democratic majorities why they pushed their favored policies.
That coal plant, I even heard people talk about, well, after natural gas, they may be able to pivot again to nuclear. And, that may be the next big thing. But there are Democrats opposed to that as well, right? I mean,
that's right. I mean, and we're making progress there, both with the public who are much more interested, willing to consider nuclear now, and with some people in the Democratic Party are willing to understand it's stable, it's clean energy that could be available, and I think it's a real possibility in the future. But we have to be real clear-eyed about the timeline. If we started today, use the site there at TransAlta in North Lewis County. If we started today, the likelihood we'd get anything built and generating power before, say, 2035 is probably best case. So it's not. I think it'll happen eventually, but it's not going to happen soon. Frankly, it's not going to be super cheap either. It'll be stable and it'll be clean, but it's not. It's not as cheap as some of the other forms. So I think that's where we'll go eventually, but it's going to take a while, and we're going to need something in the meantime that is affordable and is as clean as we can get it.
Our state has always been considered a fairly inexpensive place for energy. A lot of companies relocated here because of the cost of energy. A big reason for that is hydroelectrical, and that's another area where Democrats seem to want to cut back. I mean, they still talk about getting rid of these dams in the Snake River. That's a lot of generation there that they're talking about eliminating. Is that still a viable option, or is that going to be another thing that the Democrats want to eliminate?
Yeah, they continue to push for the dams in the Snake River to be taken out. I mean, I think it's foolish. One, it's a vast supply of energy. Two, it's clean energy, and maybe most important, we have nothing to replace it. Even not in the near term, and it's a little bit hypocritical. They like to talk about the dams way over on the eastern side of the state. There's supplying power largely to not to their communities. At the same time, the city of Seattle gets most of their power from up on the Skagit River, and nobody in Seattle is talking about taking those dams out because that would affect them directly. It's kind of what they call a luxury belief, where they want to believe in getting rid of these things as long as it doesn't affect them, and they don't want to talk about the things that would affect them directly. I
was just looking at Quincy the other day, and they have these data centers there. They're really, it's pretty amazing the change in that town, in that area, because of these data centers and this new source of revenue from the data centers. But this seems to be the new Democrat boogeyman. Is that fear-mongering? I mean, is there anything to that? Should Washington cut back on the number of data centers?
Well, it's a complicated problem, but what I would tell you is the same folks in the Central Puget Sound that are fear-mongering, and I think that's the right term. A big part of their economy relies on this. They are users of this services, virtually every day in their work and their personal lives, whether for data centers, for AI. So they want, the cake, and eat it. They can't what's the saying?
Have their cake and eat it too.
There you go. You can't have the cake and eat it too. But that's what they want. They want to fearmonger and talk about what they do. But the problems that are out there, and we do have real issues with the supply of energy, are as much from their policies as they are from data centers. And the other thing they don't understand is these data centers, say it's in Quincy, the enormous impact they have on the local economy. In addition to the jobs to build them and to run them, which are significant, maybe I've always thought the bigger issue was these are $500 million or $1 billion structures. They pay property tax on there. That's the property tax that goes to fire districts, to library districts, to school districts, to county government, to city government in some cases. So this is these are broadly a very good thing, particularly in some of the areas that Republicans represent. They've been game changers for the local economy, and the idea that they're changing, the cost of power for the average consumer is misleading. They are certainly using a lot of power. There's no getting around that. But they're also paying for a substantial part of the infrastructure that otherwise would get passed on to consumers. So I think it's a little bit of a mixed bag. But on the net, in the communities they exist, particularly in Eastern Washington, they have been a net winner. And instead of trying to figure out how to address the challenges, the Democrats would simply like to paint them as the villain. At the same time, they are using the services that go with these data centers. It's really kind of an odd argument, I think.
Moving forward in the legislature, what are Republicans going to, I mean, you're in the minority, obviously, so you can't make changes on your own, but what are you going to push for? You always say, part of your job is to try to make Democrats understand the realities here. Is that what you're going to continue to push for, and maybe find some areas where you could work together to bring down some of these costs?
Yeah, I think from a Republican standpoint, our approach to energy is for a long time it's been all of the above. We're certainly not put off by some of the new forms of sustainable energy, but that's not sufficient, and it's not affordable. So we need to do that. At the same time, we need to push forward with, we talked about gas generation plants. These are things that will provide enough energy and at an affordable price for the state of Washington. So you'll see Republicans doing that. The other thing the real big challenge in Washington is, frankly, the Democratic majority has created such a bureaucratic mess when it comes to building things that we struggle. So we've pushed for years, and where it makes sense, we have joined with Democrats on regulatory reform. We have a long way to go. What seems to happen every year is they say, yeah, we get it. We can't build stuff. We got to do better. A bill comes out, often a bipartisan bill, and then they hear from all their environmental activists in particular. And by the time it gets to the end, the bill either does nothing or goes backwards. So this is the fight we're going to have. But it's not for lack of trying, not for lack of trying to be partners in improving the climate in Washington, for building and operating, maintaining energy production, for sources of energy that will help, and for policy, changes to the gas tax, changes to the Climate Commitment Act, changes to the low carbon fuel standard, to keep the cost of energy that affects people in their daily lives down as much as possible. We're willing participants, but we're not going to buy into the idea, the ideological ideas that they have and sometimes are frankly, a little stubborn on, that are driving up the cost. We're going to continue to push with better ideas, work in good faith, but not get rolled over by their machine.
Senate Republican leader John Braun. I'm Trace Yellis. This is The Elephant in the Dome, the official podcast of the Washington State Senate Republican Caucus.